We're live!
Hey.
Does it work? It works.
Yeah.
It works.
All right, so I am author Diana Gunn. This is the Fantasies Author Unite. Wow. I can't talk today. This is bad.
It's the weekend. It's okay.
So I am fantasy author Diana Gunn. This is Fantasy Writers Unite. We are here to talk about magic. We do one of these every month. We've had a bit of chaos the past couple months getting everything organized, but we are going to be doing one every month again, and it's going to be awesome. So you two want to introduce yourselves?
Sure. So my name's Cheyanne Murray, and I also have a YouTube account, and I am also a fantasy writer. I guess we're all fantasy writers. So I don't know why I said that. Yeah.
So hello, my name is Jacqueline Kirk. I usually write on all of my social medias under Fantasy Scribbler, just to make it easy on myself. I've self-published a children's science fiction series, and I'm in the process of writing a YA fantasy trilogy so far.
All right. Well, I guess we are waiting for a couple more people to join us, but we should just dive into it. So today we are talking about magic. What does magic mean to you? That is my first question.
You just really start off with the hard ones, don't you?
Nothing worth doing is easy, right? That's what they told me when I started writing books.
Huh. I guess magic to me is anything that can't happen by natural law. So, like, for example, you can't make fire appear just without any sort of friction, oxygen, or anything like that, putting them all together and making fire. But if you can just do it at random, that's magic, because that can't happen in the natural world. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I like that.
I think for me, when I think of magic, especially in particular for fantasy writing, you just think of, there's Gandalf and all the wizards that can do all sorts of wonderful things just with a wave of their hand. And then there's other ones who's all quite, well, I suppose we might call them alchemists, very scientific and all that sort of thing. So, yeah, I think magic's a great thing. It can be used for anything as long as you do it well, I think.
I don't know if you guys can hear it, but my cats are fighting again.
No, we couldn't hear them.
No.
Okay, well, that's good. I will try to stay focused through the war that has been going on. This has actually been raging in my house for a few days now. One of my cats is a kitten, and he's like 8 months old, so he's like teenager cat. And he has just been mauling his sister, and it has been really brutal the past couple of days, so I apologize for the cats. I'm going to go with Shay on this one. To me, really, magic is about breaking the laws of nature to do something. And it also, the other key to me is that there has to be an exchange of energy or some manipulation of energy. Have you guys heard of Full Metal Alchemist?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so Full Metal Alchemist has the concept of alchemy of like equal exchange, which is like trading one thing for another. And to me, that's sort of like at the core of what magic is like an energy exchange, an energy manipulation, something that is changing. Like it's not just that it breaks the rules, it is also...
Yeah, there's always a cost.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think that's what's considered a hard magic system. You know how many people talk, there's the hard and the soft, and the ones with the consequences is the hard one, the hard magic system.
Yeah.
But everything has a cost.
Yeah, like for example, in Harry Potter, it doesn't really cost them anything to do spells. They can just make things levitate as they want, and it doesn't like cost them anything. But a lot of other ones, like Mistborn, they have to like ingest metals to get the energy to do the magic.
Yeah.
That's interesting because that's not actually how I understand hard versus soft systems of magic. The way that I understand it is that a soft system is a system that doesn't have as many rules. Like a soft system is basically a system where magic just sort of works, whereas a hard magic system is something where the rules are really well defined, is how I've understood it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense too, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
A great example of that, I'm just going to rely on anime today, is Avatar: The Last Airbender,
Yes.
which is really amazing because, and I mean, it's largely possible because it is animation, it's a visual medium, and it's a lot harder to do this in a book without like turning every single page into like 80,000 paragraphs of describing what's going on in the background. But if you watch that anime, you'll notice that like all the time when you're going places, people are bending and they're using the magic to influence the world to build the society. Like the Earthbenders literally put their cities back together using magic. It's so cool. And they really follow through on that in a way that a lot of worlds don't.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. I would say that's for sure in the hard magic category. Like they have a lot of set of rules, and there is a cost to using magic or bending. They can just, yeah, I agree.
What are your favorite examples of magic systems?
Once again, Avatar: The Last Airbender. I do like the magic systems in Mistborn. And I'm drawing a blank on anything else.
I have to say Brandon Sanderson is really good at the magic systems. I do like the one in Mistborn. I'm a bit of a fan of Anne Bishop's Black Jewels series of books. The magic in that's quite interesting with the different casts of jewels. What else? What other magic systems? I do like in Terry Pratchett's Discworld books. The magic is almost a sentient thing. You know, somebody can cast a spell. Well, when the wizards can be bothered to anyway. You know, they're a bit lazy. And it's really pot luck whether or not it works. Whether it can, you know, whether it wants to work. That's a really fun one, I think.
Yeah, I adore Terry Pratchett. I've only read maybe 8 of those books, which, you know, would be a lot of books by any author other than Terry Pratchett, right?
I've got all of his books. I've also listened to a lot of the audiobooks by Tony Robinson because it's a bit like a book and a show because he does the voices brilliantly. So listen to them when I'm doing the dishes or something. It's great.
Yeah,
that was a bit off on a tangent there.
That's all right. Terry Pratchett is tangent-inducing.
This is true.
Yeah, Discworld is definitely one of my favorites. I do love the way that the magic is alive and it feels really real. I'm reading the series that starts with the Bone Doll's twin. I forget what the trilogy is called. They have really interesting magic. It's somewhere between hard and soft magic. Like, I am very unclear on the rules, but I get the sense that the author has very clear rules themselves. So I am hesitant to say that it's really a soft magic system, but I don't understand how it works. I just have this deeper sense that there are a lot more rules than what I've been able to see, which is a really cool feeling. I love feeling like there's more to the world than what I'm actually being shown. And yeah, like it didn't really have a cost, but I did actually really like the way that the Harry Potter system was set up and the different types of magic and the way that the magic interacted with the creatures. Can I think of any other ones off the top of my head? Ooh, a lesser-known series is the Maiden of Time trilogy, which has really, really interesting magic. I don't want to get too into it because the way that the magic works in that is actually a spoiler, but it's really, really cool, and I highly recommend it. It's by Crystal Collier, and she's great.
I'll have to add that one to my to read account or to read.
You just start writing other people's books?
No.
Oh, but
I don't know what. My brain's just not with me today. I can't even talk. So.
It is a Sunday morning.
Yeah. Those are the worst.
Boy.
Not quite as bad as Monday, but almost.
Oh, God.
Well,
now tomorrow morning, this is just bad. Let's just stop talking about mornings. All right, so afternoons are great.
It's late Sunday afternoon here.
It is technically afternoon here. It is 12:13. So tell me a bit about the magic in your worlds.
Okay, so in my first novel, The Purest Blood, it was not really my best magic system. It did cost energy for her to use, and how it worked is only people of the royal bloodlines could pass down the ability to use magic. So that's not very well thought out, but in the newest one, I'm working on a concept of using different types of crystals to help put more power behind their magic without using cost of energy. So it's going to be way more complex.
Sweet.
Yeah.
In the science fiction series, it didn't have any magic system, so I was fine there. This one, I'm still working it through. It's dragon magic, so there is some. I'm waiting until I've actually finished the book, and then I'll go back and try and figure it out. I've used in the past things like sigil magic, which you see a lot in anime, really. You know, when they draw a little symbol or something, burn the paper. So, but the one I'm writing now, it's going to have to figure, just to make it understandable and to make sense. Just so it's not a magic for the sake of magic.
Yeah, that's a tough one. Right now, the world I'm working in, the magic has been fading, so I actually have, right now, I have only done the magic system for the current era, but I am looking at doing some other projects at other times in the world, which means that I'll have to create new magic systems because the magic works completely differently from how it did. And right now, the only thing that is like set in stone about that is magic used to be a lot more powerful and used to be able to like destroy entire continents and shit. Like magic was really powerful, and then the humans kind of screwed up a lot, so the gods kind of took a lot of it away. So right now the magic system is very, very low magic. Very few people have it. I do use a sigil system for the humans, but the main character is actually a demon, which means she's a demigod. And so her magic works completely differently from everybody else's. So I have a separate system for her that's really well defined and a sort of defined system for the humans. But most of them just don't have magic anymore, so it's only sort of defined for them.
As usual, you just kind of go all out.
I guess this is in your defense, really. But I have been working on this world since I was like 13, so like give me a break. I've been going at this a while.
It's okay. It's always impressive.
Thanks. So how did you decide on your magic systems? Is it just what works for your story, or did you know what you wanted to do, or?
With The Purest Blood, it was kind of not, like, I didn't go too much into the magic because that was not really the story. Like, there's not all that many scenes with the main character using magic, because it was part of the story, but it was not the story. But, yeah, in the one I'm currently writing, I'm still trying to figure out everything about it. But the main inspiration is I have some friends that are like really into crystals, and the like different kinds of crystals have different healing powers, and yeah, they were explaining all that to me, and I was like, well, that would be a really interesting magic system because that's how my brain works.
Of course.
Yeah, so I'm kind of working on more elemental side of the crystals, so like a fire opal obviously being used by someone who is a fire magic user, and so on.
Yeah.
For my one, it's integral to the story. That's why I'm taking my time to try and figure out how to use it to make it understandable. So yeah, it's just taking its time.
Yeah,
I'll get there.
Yeah, I'm still struggling too. So
yeah, it's okay. I actually I did revise my magic system for the most recent rewrite of this book. At which point the big change was that I lowered the amount of magic my main character could do. That was for plot reasons, so I haven't necessarily, like, I didn't create the magic system to suit the plot. It's just sort of what happened, but then I altered it to suit the story and to fit with what I was working with better. That wasn't how I started it, though.
That makes sense. Yeah, it's definitely the area where I struggle the most, is trying to decide how powerful the magic can be.
Yep. And I struggle with it especially as a gamer because, like, I'm like, oh, there are these really cool things. But then, like, when you work them into your actual story, you're like, yes, but they kind of cheapen a lot of the suspense and stuff. Or, like, you know, I have a dragon in the book I'm working on now, Shadow's Guardian, and it's like, how much power do I give this dragon for starters is like a whole different question too. And that's the thing, is you don't want to cheapen the suspense, and I didn't want to like up the ante and make my villain any more grand and villainous than she already was. So I had to tone down my main character a little bit.
I think one of the main things when you're thinking your magic system as well is thinking whether it's an internal cost. You know, if it's a magic that comes within or if it comes externally. I was reading something about it, which of course I can't remember now. Typical. But yeah, and that was, I read some movies and say there's a well within and this is where the power comes from. Or if the cost is drawn from the energies around you, sort of thing, and there's a cost to everyone else round about you or things.
Yeah. Oh, that actually brings
up, if you understand what I'm trying to mean.
Interesting distinction in my magic that I developed. That actually only came about at the most recent round of edits. So most magic in the world that I'm working in
Hello, everybody. I am Ella York. I am an author in young adult fantasy, and I love talking about magic. So I'm excited to see where everybody is and see what we're doing.
We were just discussing the magic systems in each of our working project the now.
Yeah, and where we came up with the ideas for them.
Oh, I remember what I was explaining now.
Yes.
So
the internal and external.
So we were talking about like how there's a cost to magic most of the time, and the cost is either internal or external. So it's either you drawing from yourself or drawing from an external source. And so the way that I have set up magic is that only some humans can manipulate the magical energy around them, and that's like a special kind of magic, and that's most magic and what most people think of. But there are certain spells that can be done with blood magic that rely on the power from the human themselves that everyone can do, but they're really risky, like really risky. So Ella, tell us about your magic system.
Well, it's yeah, jump right in. It's very similar to what you just said. Only certain people can do it. And in my story, it's kind of unique because anybody that does not have magical blood was actually put to sleep. So like all of the humans,
or like the way we put it to sleep.
No, like catatonic, kind of like they're just out cold kind of sleep. And so what happened when they put all the humans to sleep was that all the magic that had been removed from magical beings was restored to them. So the whole story goes around this main character using her magic and finding out who she is to be able to restore the balance to the world.
That's cool.
So, yeah. So the only people awake are magical.
And is that where you started? Did you create that idea first, or did that somehow spring out of your story?
I think it just kind of came from the story, because what I first started thinking about was like, I really think it would be cool to have this story where you have like all these magical elements. So there's mutants, vampires, witches, dragons, basically everything that I love in one story. And so I'm like, well, and I'm like, how can I do this and have them be able to do everything they need to do when they have to worry about humans? So then I'm like, I'll put the humans to sleep, and that can actually become part of the storyline. So it kind of stemmed from that. I was like, we'll just remove the obstacle altogether.
That's one way to do it.
Oh, that's great. So once you've built this magic system, how do you keep things internally consistent when you're drafting, or do you just save that for editing and not worry about it?
Yeah.
Okay, elaborate on what you mean in your question, because I think I know where you're going, but...
Okay, so it's like the difference between just having magic in your world for the sake of having magic and having magic that is like internally consistent, like making sure that you follow your own rules that you've created for your universe. How do you do that? You do that during drafting?
I do it during drafting, because every character that I talk about, there's a very specific magic that they have, and so it literally is entwined in who they are. So when I'm writing them, I have to stay true to what the rules are with their specific magic in order for the story to be consistent. So, for example, like I have mutants, and so certain mutants only have certain powers. They're not, it's not every mutant having the exact same thing. So when I write them, I know what their power is, and they're all learning at the same time, which is really cool. So nobody's an expert at it except for the really bad people who have been bad for a long time and studying their magic before they got it back. They're a whole part of the reason as to why the magic came back in the first place. So they were ready for it. They were expecting it. Whereas most people are just kind of like, oh, crap, I can, move mountains with my hand. What the world?
Yeah, for me, I'm definitely a strict sort of note taker when it comes to the magic system in my world. And I'm still trying to figure out approximately how much damage a person could do with magic. But I'm getting there. But yeah, for me, I definitely like to know as much as I possibly can before I start writing it. That way I know what the possibilities are with magic, how strong a single person can be, trying to figure out why or if one person could technically be stronger than another, or if it's just kind of some internal power that everyone technically has, just some people are better at using it. Yeah, it's really confusing, but I'm trying to figure it out.
I'm trying to do mine both in the drafting, because like I said, I've not got it set down in stone just yet. So in the draft, I'm just trying to keep it consistent, so it's always the same. It's not all of a sudden something really different. And then the editing, I'll probably clean it up and just make sure I have managed to keep it consistent and stuck to it. And then, until it's actually figured out exactly what I need, pinpointed it, and then I'll change it then if I need to. Like I say, if I've managed to keep it consistent, hopefully it's not too much in the editing. Please.
That's what we all hope for. I mostly do it. I have mostly done it in editing before, and I'm trying to do it more in the internal writing. But it's not as big of a deal for me necessarily, because magic is very crucial to my stories, but only in very specific parts of those stories. So, like, yes, it will mean seriously rewriting a handful of scenes if I change the magic rules, but it's only seriously rewriting a handful of scenes. And I haven't changed anything major. I've only like reduced the amount of magic people can do in certain places. So it hasn't been too big of a deal even in editing, but in my other big series that I'm working on, magic is all the time, everywhere, in like pretty much every scene. So I've been, let's just say my magic system for that world is many pages. Many pages.
Same.
So what is your favorite part of building a magic system?
Oh, I think for me, my favorite part is that I don't have limitations. You know, I can do whatever I want to do, wherever I want to do it, as long as I make it make sense in the story. And so I love the fact that you don't have limitations. You don't have real world limits when you're dealing with magical systems, and any and everything that you can think of, you can do. So, for example, my MC, she is a mutant that can control the elements. So anytime she controls the elements, like her eyes glow a certain color and all of her veins turn the color of the element that she's about to wield. So it's really, really cool. And I saw that in a picture and I'm like, I can do it because it's my book and I'm making this magical world. So as long as you develop it correctly, you can add anything that you can possibly think of, you can make it happen. So I think that's my favorite thing about being able to develop the magical system.
Yeah, I 100% agree. The best thing about making magic systems is you're creating rules, but at the same time, there's really no rules. Like anything you want to make a rule, you can. There's no outside rules coming in that have to play. It's just whatever you want.
I'm actually the opposite. I like setting limitations on it because then your protagonist has to go, oh, bugger, I can't sort this with my mind. I'm going to have to think of something else. So it gives its own kind of conflicts and things like problems. Although I do love the ones where there's no limitations. They're fantastic, but for my story, no, they're limited.
I definitely agree with limitations, but I love the fact that you get to choose how big or small those limitations are.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. See, I actually love planning the little details, the minutiae of the different rituals and the different ways that people use magic. That's my thing. Like, I love writing the scenes where they do the magic. I keep them fairly sparse because that isn't the point of my books by any means. But I really love those scenes, and I really like writing funeral scenes and stuff like that. That gives you an idea of not just how the magic works, but also how it ties into the spirituality that dominates the culture that I'm in.
I have a random question that's kind of related to what we're talking about. So how do you guys, if you do it at all, come up with different names for the magical elements that you include in your story?
Skip.
Because I mean, you don't really have to use real world names, especially if it's something different. Like, how do you come up with those names? I mean, I know my process, but I want to hear yours.
I have a beta reader for that. She is an endless fountain of names, and I haven't used anything myself in months, and it's so good.
I'm one of those type of fantasy writers that everyone dreads who comes up with their own names. I try to make them so that you can actually sound them out, though. So there's that.
Yeah, I try to do that too.
I'm the same, actually. I just make a word up. Yeah, I just try and make it. I'm not one of those, it's all consonants and no vowels and apostrophes and things like that. I don't do that. Just keep it simple. I think it's best.
Yeah.
Apostrophes have no business anywhere near you.
Agreed.
And yet you see them.
I think for me, if it's something that makes sense in a real world sense of the word, I try to I'll go in a thesaurus and I'll type in the word and I'll see what other random ways you could say it. And then I try to think of a really cool way to turn one of those into a magical sounding word. And if it's something that I've completely made up, well, the world is my oyster. And like you said, I just try to make it so you can sound it out, but that's about the extent of it. It's not going to make sense.
Fair enough. All right. That was actually all the questions that I had. Ella, you weren't here at first, so do you want to give a shout out to any magic systems from other people's works that you really enjoyed?
You know, I just read The Children of Blood and Bone by Tomi Adeyemi, and I don't know if you all have had the chance to read that, but the magical system that she created in that, it's something that most of us have never heard of before, but she does such a great job of just kind of explaining everything. And so I think that I really, really, as of recently, loved the magical system that she created.
Awesome. Any others?
Oh, you're putting me on the spot here. Well, not necessarily.
Put it to us too.
It doesn't have to be books. We talked about anime.
I'm trying to think of something that. Oh gosh, you're really putting me on the spot here.
All right, we can get back to that. We actually have
let me think about it.
A question from someone watching, from Morgan. Have you ever tried to make a magical language?
No.
See,
no, I'm not that brave.
And I'm always kind of like on the debate side about magical languages because, like, let's say in one kingdom you have a magical language and everything's done by words from that magical language. If someone's on the opposite side of the world and they speak a different language, would they have a different magical language? Or would it somehow be the same, like where the world's connected before? Basically, it just makes my brain hurt trying to figure that out. So I prefer more, instead of coming up with a magical language, I prefer more, it doesn't matter what language you're from or where in the world you're from. They all kind of figure it out somehow, in some way, internally or with things in their natural world.
And for me, when I did mine, in my backstory, everything was at one point connected. So even though it takes place in like Earth, everything was at one point connected on one big piece of land. And then there was an event that happened that caused everything to separate. So they all use the same words for the same kind of magic, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, I've created words. I've never tried to create a whole language. And the magic words aren't really used by people. They're more of a thing that exists for the demons and the actual gods themselves. So they don't really play a major part in my world. But they are there. There are two words that are used for magic, and there's a reference to another word that has been used for magic in the past. But it's really not a mortal thing. Like, mortals do magic with sigils, basically. The words, like, in order to make a magical word work, you need to have a certain inherent level of magic that humans just don't have. At least not in the time frame. All right, I think that's our only question from people. Any other questions, folks? Anything else we wanted to discuss?
Do you think you can have a traditional fantasy story without magic?
Yes.
I was thinking about that, and I'm sure I've read some, but I cannot for the life. It's one of those other things you put yourself on the spot and you're like, oh, no, blank. Can't think of one.
I think that you could have mythological creatures in place of magic. Like, in my opinion, a story about a kingdom fighting an evil dragon would still be a fantasy story.
Would you count dragons as like a form of magic, though? Like, to me, that is inherently saying you have magic in your world, because dragons, like, physically can't work. Physics says no dragons. So the second you have dragons in your world, to me, that is magic.
But Could there be dragons?
Well,
because there are like, if you want to go nerd enough, there are like creatures that like beetles that spit out acid, and you could replace that for fire somehow. But actually, I watched this one documentary in quotations one time about what if dragons were real, and in their version of dragons, they had like helium inside of their body that would build up gas, and then they like to chew on a specific type of rock that would create sparks, and so that helium gave them the ability to fly, even though they shouldn't be able to fly. And then it also gave them the ability to breathe fire, even though they shouldn't be able to breathe fire. So I guess you could come up with ways without magic if you're nerd enough.
If you're determined enough, yeah, I guess anything is possible.
Yeah, you gotta challenge.
You never know what's going to be around in 10,000 to 20,000 years.
I think there's also like the room for fantasy stories where the magic is implied, and so you don't necessarily see it on screen, but like there's like an understanding that somewhere in the background there's magic going on. Like a lot of the Game of Thrones books are like that. Like there is some sense that like some magic works randomly here and there, but it's not consistent, and most of it is very much in the background. I think that's very possible rather than having it be like a really blatant upfront story mechanic. But I don't know if you can do without it completely and still call it fantasy.
But would it probably would be fantasy. It would probably be under some other genre, I would think.
I think that depends on how much is implied. Like it's a fine line, but I think that
yeah, it's one of those how do you define it type questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like how some people try to convince me that Star Wars is a fantasy story, not sci-fi.
It's science. The Force
because it has magic.
Totally sci-fi.
The Force is totally magic, though. It's science fiction.
Yeah. See, it's a real argument. But they have spaceships in space and laser beams. And
exactly.
That's why I said science fantasy.
Yeah, but some people are specifically just fantasy. And I'm like, this makes me angry.
The spaceships are not powered by
argument.
magic. If the spaceships were powered by magic, maybe. Oh, what is the difference between a fantasy system without magic and alternate history? I guess that is actually the question we're discussing right now. I don't know. I think it really and I also think you can have a fantasy world where it's implied that magic used to work and doesn't now. Like, in my world, most magic doesn't work now, but it could be no magic works now, but we have all of these things that were very clearly done by magic, and, like, they are still relics that, like, have, like, little bits of remaining magic. But, like, you have to make sure that it's really, those magical things did happen, I think, and not just, that's the mythology, but that is what really happened.
I forgot the question. I'm sorry. What was the question?
What is the difference between a fantasy system without magic and alternate history?
That is a good question.
It is.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to. Because the question, if you're saying like, what's the difference between a fantasy without magic and alternate history? Well, alternate history, if I'm understanding the question correctly, is just the different like retelling of what could have happened in history, correct?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it'd be
It'd be a bit like
if
the Man in the High Castle.
Yeah, like if you created
the dinosaurs
like a world,
never went away,
or if you created like a world in England, and there are, say, fantasy creatures or something, but no magic. Is it still fantasy, or is it just alternate history where you just change the history?
But in order for something to be an alternate history, wouldn't it have been something that could have physically been possible in history? And now it's just based on this other set of circumstances. Now it just turned out differently, right? Am I like interpreting?
Yeah,
it would be like Hitler winning
it would have
the war
still had to be
instead of-
something. Yeah, it would have had to have been something that could have physically been possible in a different historical setting now history is different. For example, let's say the dinosaurs never went away. What would that have been like living with dinosaurs? That to me is not a fantasy because dinosaurs really did exist. And you're just saying if they had never been extinct, what would it be like now? I don't know. Unless I'm reading that wrong.
Yeah.
No, yeah, that makes sense to me.
Whereas like if you're talking about like, there's all this stuff talking about, well, back in the ancient Mayans, they had access to a different kind of whatever. And this is how they came up with the stuff that they did. And like that implying that there was something magical that's no longer there, which is what I think you're talking about. So it's two different things.
Yeah.
That
explains it quite well.
All right. So I think that is a really good answer to that. Let's see if we have any more questions from the crowd. Feel free to ask. And do we have any more questions for each other before we wrap up?
I have one. Evil.
Yes.
So how do you guys decide limitations with magic? It's a hard one.
Oh, that is a hard one.
Do you have a trick, or does it just... Yeah, because this is what I'm struggling with. So.
You said, how do you define the limitations?
Or decide?
Well, for me, a lot of it has to do with your blood, like how powerful you are. So there are a certain set of people that are more powerful than the others based on their bloodline. And whereas everybody has a certain amount of power, you have to decide, like, for your story, does it make sense for this person to have the ability to control everything and that makes nobody an adversary? Or do you have just like limits that you have to place for what makes sense in your story?
Mm-hmm.
Is it something that they grow into, or do they just all of a sudden have all this power?
Yeah, I think it's a hard one. Like, if you can control air, how do you define how much air that character could control? Like, is it just in their area? Can they make a hurricane? Can they blow someone off across a football field, like, all the way across? Like, where does the limitations start and end, I guess?
I think that's where you have to ask yourself, what do I need for my story? Like, you don't have those limitations. So if you need your character to be able to blow somebody across a football field, well, you can make it so. And you just, maybe they grow into it. Like, maybe at first it's just a little light breeze, and now all of a sudden, like, you can fling them across after a little growth. Well, I'll just tell you, like, for example, with my story, when they go back and they tell the history of it, the original, I guess she was an Elasian, the original Elasian, she could control light and darkness. Like, she literally had full control over all elements. And then there was a situation that happened, and she lost control of her emotions, and it's this whole big thing, but she lost control of her emotions because she was attacked by her brother, and it turned into this whole big thing. And after that, she could no longer control it, so light had to be shared with darkness. And there was storms, they couldn't control that anymore, but she could spark a storm, but she could no longer control all of the weather elements again. So I explained that in the story, like, when telling what happened, why she lost the ability to do that. And then because of the damage that was done, they decided to remove all magic. And so that's kind of where the story picks up, where now somebody has figured out a way to bring it back, and they have bad intentions. So, I think it's really just, if you're going to do something grand, just explain it. But it's your world. Do what you want.
And with defining the limitations, I think you would have to think of what the cost of the magic is. If the magic's drawn from your energy, you only have so much before you collapse, sort of thing. So that'd be interesting. Harry Potter had limitations because they had to learn spells. So if they didn't learn it, or if they hadn't learned it, they didn't do it, sort of thing. So yeah, I don't think that would have helped you at all.
That's okay.
As for me, I am
what
actually...
exactly are you?
Oh,
go ahead.
I'm a very villain-focused writer. So I tend to start
Surprise!
with a villain, and then they come to me with their powers fully formed and everything. So then I have to figure out how to appropriately power my main person or party if I'm doing a novel about a group of characters, so that fighting the villain I've had, because usually my villains come to me like fully formed and they're just like, hi, I'm here, I'm badass, see what I... So then I have to make characters who are going to be strong enough to challenge them, but also weak enough to be challenged by them. And so that is the balance that I'm usually trying to strike. And it really is, because the villains come to me first, that is usually how I build my limitations.
Yeah, for me, I'm trying to figure out, because like let's say you have a society where a lot of people can use magic. I'm trying to figure out how far a person can go before it sort of alters the world around them too much. Like if a person can control Earth and they move too much Earth, that could create earthquakes. It could change the natural landscape. If a person controls the weather, what does that do to the weather, say, a country over? Like what effects do these massive amounts of magic have? So I'm trying to tone down the scope so that it's not like, oh, why doesn't that one person just take over the whole world? Because clearly they can just create a tornado. Like, So it's limiting it as much as possible.
Well, and that's why I think that's where I think you can kind of go with what Jackie was saying, is that their power source, if it comes from within, they will eventually tucker out. Like they can't do but so much, and then they have no more energy to do it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I guess it's just trying to decide how far they can go power-wise.
Yeah.
How far do you need them to go? That's exactly how far they can go. Very simple.
It's simple and complex at the same time.
And you know what? And I think, and I know this sounds kind of weird, but if you think about, for example, like Harry Potter, right? And everybody could do magic when we're dealing with the Harry Potter world, when they're in Hogwarts and all the other people that come in. And then there's obviously people that are much stronger with their magic than other people. And, you know, like you have like squibs and you have, you know, dementors. Everybody has their own lane, but there's certain limits to what they can do. And even Voldemort, he who should not be named, he even had limits with what he could do. He couldn't, you know, send up the death mark or whatever, like hundreds of miles away. That's not something that he could do. One of his followers had to do it. And he could only really wreak havoc where he was. He could travel very fast to get to another place, but he could only wreak havoc where he was. So I think you just kind of have to make it make sense for your story. But nobody ever questioned, well, why doesn't Voldemort just turn the whole world dark? He just couldn't. You know, she just didn't make it so he could do it. So, you know, you just have to figure out what you want your characters to be able to do and then make it make sense in your story. You don't really have to explain the rest. You know what I mean?
Oh, makes sense to me. Yeah. All right. Any other final questions from the crowd, from each other?
I have a question.
All right.
How, because the world of fantasy is just so broad, how did you guys hone in on specific magic that you used in your story? Was it just because it was your favorite, or did you end up adding different magical abilities as you wrote your story because it just made more sense? So how did you come up with the magic you used?
For me, I just didn't really like the idea of magic that could be say portable, like enchanting an item or something like that, because I just thought that would just make it way too complex. Like if you put a spell on something, how far away can that be from the spell user before, like if it would wear out or something like that, or I don't know why someone couldn't just enchant like the whole world and like in gradual amounts and so on and so on and so on. So I kind of stay away from the portable enchanting kind of magic. So it's all more like spur of the moment kind of internal magic that you push out, more like a muscle or something like that. It's all mental. It's not something that stays behind after they leave. That's what kind of drew me to that. If that makes sense.
I like it.
I'm just trying to, excuse me, starting off with a magic system that's clear to fantasy readers, and then trying to develop that one. It's dragon magic I'm trying to actually need to do with it. So I've just taken earlier and tried to kind of make it more, not more than it would ever be unique, but certainly more in tune with my story.
Yeah, I don't know. Honestly, I've been working in this world since I was like 13, so I don't know where the magic originally came from. It came from somewhere in my head. And that's about all I can offer. I will say that I did deliberately stay away from elemental magic because I felt like that was harder to decide on limits I actually liked. But that was really the only intentional decision. Everything else was just sort of how it happened for my story. All right. Here's another question. I already kind of answered this, but you guys didn't. Have you ever had to go back and adjust capabilities and limitations to make a plot work?
Yes.
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 Have yet. It was like I said, I wrote sci-fi before I didn't have my, so this is fantasy, and I should imagine.
Kind of choppy.
Yeah, I can't hear you.
You're kind of choppy.
You're breaking up a little.
Yeah, do you maybe want to try logging out and logging back in?
Okay. Is it me you're talking
to? It's only you.
Yeah. Technology.
Okay, well, I'll go while she figures that out. So I think for me, I've had to go back in bit more. And so I had to go back and kind of rewrite their process so that they could get to the point where they could do the magic I needed them to do. Because for me, like I said, everybody started out with no magic. So there's some people that could do magic, or they couldn't do magic. Nobody could do magic, but some people have been practicing and kind of getting ready for the day when they could. So they're obviously a little bit further along. They know spells, they know how to do potions, they are aware of what their bloodline is. So they, their mutations. So they're a little bit more experienced. And then there's people that knew absolutely nothing about the magical world. They just thought they were regular people just kind of walking through life. And then all of a sudden, one day they wake up and they have magical powers and they're like, what the world is this? So obviously it takes them a little bit longer to get there. And to be able to do the things that they need to do. So if I get to a point in my story where I need you to already know this, sometimes I have to go back and make their process a little bit faster so that they can get to the point I need them to be in the story. There she is. You're back.
I'm back.
And you're actually moving this time.
Did you want to try again?
What were you saying before we lost you?
What was I saying? What was the question? it?
Yeah, have you ever had to go back and edit your novel because of limitations?
I was saying that no, because it was sci-fi that I've published before, which doesn't have magic. But this one, I imagine I will have to do some editing, fix it in the editing because I've still to figure it out properly. Are you hearing me okay this time?
Yes,
we can hear you loud and clear.
I will say that. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, it's fine.
I was gonna say I will say that in talking to a lot of fantasy writers, I've learned that it's one of the hardest things to write with the most rewrites. Like I've not met a single fantasy author that has not done at least 5 rewrites of their manuscript and has not gone back and changed 50 million things in it. Because when you're dealing with fantasy, like you said, there are limitations, there are rules, there are things that you put in place. But because it's not something that is just ingrained in your brain, a lot of times you forget what you put in place. So you have to kind of go back and like when I think it's right. But if you get it, you can nail it.
Yeah. For me, in my last novel, the major edits that I went back for magic systems was definitely healing. Because I wanted there to be some aspect of magic healing, but you definitely have to put a lot of restrictions on that because I didn't want to eliminate death.
Yeah, you don't want to eliminate that. You still want your people to be able to like suffer from injuries.
Yeah, I wanted there still to be like a limit on how injured a person could get where even magic couldn't help them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That was definitely something I've had to do too, because it's like a lot of my stories tend to focus on the horrors of war and stuff like that. So it's like you have to be really careful with how much you can heal people before that stuff stops being as horrifying.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. It just kind of eliminates, like, gets rid of the suspense because you don't believe that these characters will ever die because, hey, they got an arm cut off, but someone can just heal it back on.
Exactly. So it's important to draw a line somewhere with healing.
Yes.
All right. I think that was the final question. Unless we have any more last minute stragglers. No? No more questions? All right, well then, let's call it. We will be doing another one of these next month. Subscribe to all of our channels, and you will find out which channel it'll be hosted on as soon as we have decided. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.